Good morning, TPSD students and parents, and welcome back to Distance Learning 101. This past Monday, we had Miss Elliott on first grade, and now we're going to jump right to the high school with Miss Blanton and her 9th grade English class. And thank you for joining us. And we're going to see a whole new experience with the high school as opposed to our elementary students. So Miss Blanton, if you would kind of tell us what you have for us today.
So for the past week actually, we've been kind of working on narratives, something fun and creative that the students would enjoy and not be as rigorous or structured as essay writing.
But still give them something to keep the process going so they don't go brain dead for lack
exactly.
of a better word.
And focusing on engaging the reader as well as working on grammar and mechanics, writing dialogue.
And let me tell you, reading and writing and proper grammar is so important, and we obviously want to do everything we can to help our students there, and that also is beneficial for the ACT.
It is. A lot of our students have not had grammar for a couple of years, and of course the English portion of the ACT is mostly grammar. So this is kind of like a review.
Okay, great. Well, you have put together a fantastic program this morning that we're going to look at, and we hope your students are watching, and we'll get to see you actually teach again. All right, so we're going to talk about writing a narrative, and we're going to go from there.
Okay.
And I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start teaching.
Okay, so last week students read There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury, which is an apocalyptic dystopian story. Pretty interesting and engaging for the kids. And so this week the students are reading There Will Come, not There Will Come Soft Rains, but There Will, The Uncomfortable Bed and Lamb to the Slaughter,
okay,
which focuses a lot on irony. So we're really looking at dramatic elements that you would put in a story.
Okay.
So I kind of gave them a mentor text for them to look at. So last week we read There Will Come Soft Rains, and some of the things that made it engaging was the fact that you did not know what happened until about halfway through the story. And so the kids, really, it was interesting, even though it was written in 1950, the house, the setting is in 2026, and the house is very similar to like a smart house, where it has like a Roomba that comes out and vacuums, but there's only one character, the house,
okay,
because the people are gone due to a nuclear attack.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's kind of, it was during the Cold War, and so some of the things that made it engaging was the fact that you had to figure out things on your own through clues. And so this week's text, the character development was very strong in both Lamb to the Slaughter and The Uncomfortable Bed. And so that's one of the elements that, if I were doing this for the students, that in one of my conferences, we would talk about how character development is important and just the fact, as I've already alluded to, the literary elements. So Lamb to the Slaughter uses all three types of irony. Okay. So you've got a little housewife that's pregnant, 6 months pregnant, and her husband comes home, he's a police officer, and he tells her that he's leaving.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so the students, I asked them this week as part of one of their assignments to identify an example of dramatic, situational, and verbal irony in the story. And so several of them have already turned in this assignment, and she kills him with a leg of lamb. And then when the police are there to investigate, she feeds the leg of lamb to the police officers. So a little bit get rid of the evidence. So a little bit of dramatic irony. And so I'm trying to choose texts that the students would enjoy. And also, since we're working on narratives, what makes something engaging. So of course irony, and then you've got The Most Uncomfortable Bed, which the whole time the guy is paranoid that his friends are going to prank him. So he doesn't get a good night's rest because he's afraid they're going to prank him, and they never do. So it's just kind of humorous,
right.
And it's short. It's about 2 pages.
Okay.
And so in that the students read that, the uncomfortable bed, and then they had to identify the 5 parts of a narrative. So that leads up to kind of the discussion that I would have. I would go over all of this with them in one of my conferences, and then I would actually start teaching.
Okay.
So this would just kind of be us interacting, them answering questions, discussions about the 2 texts.
I feel like this is the type of assignment where you are desperately seeking interaction with the students.
Yes.
Discussions going back and
Right.
forth. I bet that can be really entertaining.
It can be, and it also can be a struggle when they do not want to participate. Now, one of the good things that I have noticed is the kids are more likely to use the chat box on the Hangout Meets,
Okay.
Because they would rather see their question pop up than ask it. And it kind of gives me a little bit of opportunity to have some of the students that are less likely to participate in a traditional classroom, they will participate in this.
So they're thriving under this
Right.
new format. That's
Some of the-
outstanding.
So then I would go into some of reviewing of the previous texts that we've read.
Okay.
So, what made them interesting. And the 7th Man starts, it's called a frame story. And so I review them about what a frame story is.
Okay, what is that?
A frame story is a story within a story.
Ah.
So you start out with the third person, an example for the 7th Man, and then it will go to a first person telling of events.
Okay.
And that's always an engaging story because the 7th Man lost a childhood friend because of a tsunami. And the kids always think it's something that actually happened, and it's just a short story narrative. So that would lead to the fact that it was engaging
Gotcha.
because of the plot. Then Pyramus and Thisbe also is it's kind of similar to Romeo and Juliet, but it was written but prior to Romeo and Juliet. And what makes it interesting is the irony. They, just like in Romeo and Juliet, they do not realize that the other one is not dead and they kill each other. So once again, I'm bringing up that whole irony
Right.
and that twist. Those twists and turns are what make a story. The last text that we read before spring break was some excerpts from the Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
So we really were getting into some of the fun stuff right at spring break. The Odyssey, of course, is written in media res, which means it starts in the middle of the action. So I would talk about how, and as I'm going through all this, what makes that engaging? What
Right.
interests you? Why would that be more engaging than just telling the story in the same order, in chronological order? Animal Farm, the fact that it is an allegory representing something larger than itself, and then kind of talk about There Will Come Soft Rains was also a warning about the Cold War. Kind of just digging deep, because this is a pre-AP class, challenging them to think outside of the box. And then their summer reading for last summer was to read Lord of the Flies, and so definitely emphasizing setting
Gotcha.
and character development in that. And they, honestly, they've really enjoyed talking about their hatred for some of the characters in Lord of the Flies, and so that,
Who was the most hated character?
yes, Jack,
Okay.
Jack and Ralph, it just depends on who you ask. And so Lord of the Flies, it really led to discussion about characters that you love to hate, and
Exactly.
so that's what makes a story. So all of that is probably would take about 5 to 10 minutes discussing.
Okay.
And then I try not to make my conferences last very long because about 30 minutes is all that their attention spanned.
Right.
Plus there's so many other things going on.
Well, these are kind of deep, dark
Yes,
narratives.
and that's why I chose them, is they have a tendency to enjoy that even more so than a happy story.
Right.
Something that's a little twisted, something they have to think. And honestly, they start talking about movies. It's led to discussion of movies that are very similar to these stories, and then that leads into there's no new story.
Right.
So it's kind of, then they start thinking how they can use that advice in their own writing.
no pun intended, kind of ironic
Yeah.
here with the times that we are living
Yes.
and experiencing right now.
Before I started this narrative, I did a survey on Google Classroom to see if it would be too disturbing for anyone.
Gotcha. Maybe you can write a book about the current times and implement that into your classroom, because goodness, there could be a lot of interesting conversations that come out of that.
It really has. I've been very amazed at some of the thoughts that they've had.
We've got a few seconds left before we go into our break, and maybe we do this coming out of a break. I want to talk about some of those conversations that the students have come up, and the ones that you have really found intriguing, because their minds are everywhere.
Oh, they really are.
Right now. And to be able to focus in on that, I'm very interested. Maybe that says a lot about me of how they view this, and maybe how that translates into what they're going through right now.
Okay.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into those questions. Welcome back to Distance Learning 101. I'm Greg Ellis, and joining me today is Miss Blanton, an English teacher for the 9th grade at Tupelo High School. And we've been talking about different narratives, that things that she has posed to your students, and the questions and conversations that have come out of this, I can only imagine. So
Yes.
if you would, and you don't have to share the kid's name unless you want to, let's put them on the spot, but some of the questions and the outside of the box thinking that you've noticed out of these.
One of the most common themes is they like to ask me, have I ever experienced anything like this before?
Gotcha.
That's a very pertinent, it's very appropriate. And so I've actually found myself asking older teachers. My dad was a high school teacher and principal, and so I've asked him, do you ever recall? And no, the answer is no. And so that's what I've told them. I'm like, they ask about 9/11, were we impacted like this?
Right.
No, we were not. Or I told them the only thing I can really relate would be two things. Katrina, as a teacher, when we had students come from the Gulf Coast in Louisiana that had been out of school for several weeks. And then also the ice storm of '94 that I remember as a high school student. And my school wasn't impacted, but I know several counties near us were. So those are the things that they've asked. They've also asked, they're very curious about the future. What will this look like?
Right.
A lot, at first, they were very nervous about what it held for them because they will take the English 2 state test next year. ACT, of course, is huge. That's a lot of discussion. What can I do to work on, or what can I work on in this time to improve my ACT score? But, they come up with conspiracy theories.
They want to get you. They
want to drag me into a discussion about who's to blame for this, or did so-and-so create this, to destroy the United States. And so I've tried to tell them all those stories that you're coming up with in your head, let's put those on paper.
Well, that had a field day with the Kennedy assassination.
Yes, most definitely. And so it's kind of been fun because it's outside of the norm, because they are able to be more creative than they usually are in the classroom.
And for you get to see them in a different light than
yes.
You probably lose the fact in some of these conversations that you're a student. You're so engaged in the conversation.
It's hilarious. I have a dog, and so my dog shows up, occasionally in one of the conferences, and so now they're all like talking to my dog. It's kind of, in some ways, some of the students, it's kind of formed a better student-teacher relationship because they see me in a different light. And
you're not just a teacher. You have a house.
I have a house, and I'm concerned. I've never told a high school student, I love you, and I feel like every conference I'm like, I miss y'all and I love y'all so much.
That's awesome. All right, so now we're going to transition into getting them to put their thoughts on paper and writing narratives. So how does that begin? How does that come about?
Because they're writing a prequel, what happened before the nuclear attack and There Will Come Soft Rains, I start talking about you can't go somewhere you can't plan a trip unless you know where you're going.
Right.
Well, in a prequel, you already know where you're going.
Right.
And so I tell them that in all writing, it's important to do planning, but very much so in a narrative, because you've got to figure out how you're going to get there.
Right.
And so I make the analogy to planning a vacation. Where are your stops? Where are your twists and turns? And then, of course, it's not just the plot that makes the story engaging, it's the characters that you meet.
Right.
And so we kind of go through that. And then, of course, I review. Last week I gave them 3 pictures.
Okay.
And I told them to write a paragraph, either rising action or climax,
Okay.
based on what they saw in that picture.
And explain what those are.
And every single student that participated chose something different.
Gotcha.
And so I kind of talk about that fact that the picture was your end goal in that situation.
Okay.
So I'm trying to, of course, review and tell them that they can do this, reassure them, you did this last week, we're just building on what we've been working on in these last week or 2.
Do they enjoy the writing as much as they do the discussion, or is
It's hit or miss.
hit or miss?
Yes.
Okay.
And honestly, some students, they had already written their prequel before the conferences, because I put the assignments up on Monday, and some of them, they enjoyed There Will Come Soft Rain so much that they went ahead and wrote their prequel. And then
That is awesome.
Yes. So it's been kind of fun to see their creativity. So, of course, I told them that the assignment is to write a prequel, and I explained the analogy, what do we already know? We know that the house in the city, the house has not been destroyed, but the city's been destroyed, and the house is the only one left standing. And so I tell them, I really am encouraging them to use all those literary elements of all those short stories and narratives that we've analyzed throughout the semester. Use those in your story. I reassure them that they know what they're doing.
It's kind of like the final exam where
Yes.
everything that you learn the whole year you take.
Yes, it's very cumulative.
So how do you grade that? What are you looking for? Do you give them?
They have a rubric, a narrative
Okay.
rubric, and it's character development is
Okay.
strong, plot is strong on it. It's a 12-point grading scale, which is what they're used to for all their other essays.
Gotcha.
And then, I've kind of walked them through it in this PowerPoint. And so that's kind of, I explain, this is what I'm really looking for.
Okay.
These are the high points. I tell them to go back and look at what I've commented on from last week's paragraph and not to make those same mistakes.
Gotcha.
That's, I told them, last time, punctuation errors, I graded lightly. If you make those same punctuation errors, I'm going to count off a little bit more.
Right.
So we talk about they're just having to write the exposition and the rising action, because the climax is where There Will Come Soft Rains begin. And so we kind of just emphasize that. And I just start brainstorming with them. We know there are 4 characters. We know what they were doing because there are shadows on the house. And we talk about, I review that this type of writing is much different than an essay writing.
Right. Right.
So they always want to use the word show in their essays, like this shows such and such. And so I always write, don't show, tell.
Tell, yes.
Well, now I'm saying, now is your time to show. Describe to me what's going on. Be descriptive. Use dialogue, use figurative language. We've studied figurative language since, the 2nd or 3rd grade. And so it's very important, that you utilize those, because it's just like any skill. If you don't
Right.
use it, it goes
Right.
away. And then we talk about character development, irony, the man in the family, and There Will Come Soft Rains. Hey, what kind of irony could be used? Situational irony with him, And so it was interesting yesterday. Somebody goes, well, he could be a spy for the Soviet Union, and that's why his house was, and I'm like, great idea. That's why their house was left standing. He was supposed to have been somewhere else, and they were protecting him. And so it's really been interesting, because I can, I'm seeing their faces on screen. I can almost see their brains turn and how it will go, what kind of ideas are coming. And then I just review characterization.
Okay.
And this is stuff that we've worked on all year. But I did go ahead and go through all of this with the students, and I put this PowerPoint on my Google Classroom so that they can refer back to it, because I am very conscious of their time. And so then, you know, we talk about character development, and then we go about, you know, did the family have any idea that this might happen? Were they aware? Because during the 1950s, and I kind of give a little history, people did build bomb shelters. They were afraid. So did this family have fears in 2026? And we just kind of talk about that, and how long before did the prequel begin? Because that was a question that came up several times last semester when I did this unit, was, you know, how long did it take before the story began?
Right.
And we talk about the fact that there was a dog that was still alive, so it can't have been too long,
right.
Or couldn't have been too long.
Well, this is outstanding, and I feel like I've learned a lot here. The one thing that I would like for you, we just got a few seconds left, is to stress the importance of doing your assignments and turning them in. As we have said many times, you're not getting well, technically you're not getting graded, but the assignments you do will not hurt you, but they certainly can help you.
I just this week, the end, talked about the fact that grammar's huge on the ACT. Everything that I'm doing is for a reason. It's reviewing you of the skills that we've went over this semester. It's preparing you for the English 2 state test. And also, I just feel like it's important to learn these writing skills, because at Tupelo High School we have the senior project where they have to write about themselves. And so these are skills that they will need, not just for high school, not just for a test prep, but also being able to express yourself is a skill that even as adults we use every day.
Every day. Well, Ms. Blanton, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your classroom experiences that you and your students get every day. And I hope they appreciate the great job that you're doing. And again, maybe we'll have you back if we're not back in school soon. All right, we will see you Friday. I'm Greg Ellis. Have a great day.